Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Proser from Kempsville Conservative Synagogue in Virginia Beach, and this is our Torah commentary for Shabbat of July 4th, 2020, the 12th day of Tammuz, 5780. As usual, we thank Rabbi Avram Kogan, Rabbi Joseph Prauser, Rabbi Matthew Berkowitz, Rabbi Brad Artson, and the United Synagogue Torah Sparks for their various teachings and publications on this week's Parsha. This week, July 4th, 2020, we join with all other congregations outside of Israel as we read the Dual-Parshiyot of Chukat and Balak in the book of Bamidbar. In Israel, because Shavuot was observed for only one day, and it fell on a Friday, they were able to go on to the regular weekly Shabbat Torah reading the day after. In the diaspora, Shavuot was observed for 2 days. We didn't continue with the regular weekly sequence of Torah readings until the week after Shavuot. So for the past 5 weeks since Shavuot, the weekly Torah Parsha readings in Israel have been one Parsha ahead of what was being read in the diaspora. We bring those readings back together this week as we catch up by reading this double portion of Chukat and Balak. Parshat Chukat begins on page 880 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 652 of the Hertz. Parshat Chukat opens with one of the most inscrutable passages in the Torah about the para aduma, the red heifer. The ashes of an entirely red cow are mixed with other significantly red ingredients with which it was to be burned for use in a ritual that purifies someone who has been in contact with a corpse. In an ironic twist, the ashes and the mixture which render the afflicted Israelite pure renders the officiating priest impure. It should be noted that a preoccupation with death was an ever-present part not only of ancient Egyptian theology, but also of daily life in Egypt. This ritual presented here appears to be designed to distance people from excessive involvement with the dead. When the Israelites arrive at Kadesh, a series of significant events take place. Miriam dies and is buried. Immediately after her death, we learn that Israel is without water. The juxtaposition providing the impetus for the midrashic link between Miriam and the Israelites' miraculous access to water in the wilderness. The Israelites quarrel with Moshe about their potentially lethal lack of water. God tells Moshe and Aharon to equip themselves with Moshe's staff and then to order a rock to produce water for the Israelites. Moshe departed from these precise instructions, instead striking the rock twice. God responds to the prophetic breach of discipline harshly. Because they did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelites, Moshe and Aharon are told they were not be permitted to accompany the people into the promised land. Many commentators have struggled to explain why God would inflict a penalty this harsh on Moshe after all his years of faithful service, leading the Israelites through some very difficult circumstances and challenges, and on Aharon, who seems to be an innocent bystander while Moshe struck the rock to draw water from it rather than speaking to it. If we are to assume a moral God, None of the explanations offered by classical commentators seem to be adequate to justify this severe a reaction to God. The suggestion of the Midrashic editors of the Eitz Chaim Chumash is one that should be explored further. They suggest that one might conclude that God's decree of death in the wilderness for Moshe and Aharon was not so much a punishment as a recognition that their time of leadership was over. Moshe and Aharon were the right leaders for the Exodus, for Sinai, for establishing the Mishkan. They were not the right people to lead a younger generation into battle. Rabbi Shmuel Avidor HaKohen explains, the ethical authority of a leader ceases the moment a leader begins to use violence and force. It is for this reason that Moshe was punished. The purpose is to demonstrate a vital lesson to future generations and leaders. When it is possible to achieve one's goal through the spoken word and through explanation, it's forbidden to use coercion, force, or the power of the stick. I recommend that you read further the various commentaries in the Eitz Chaim as well as the Hertz to examine various reflections on Moshe's action and God's reaction, as well as the other parts of this week's Parsha that rightly leave us with more questions than answers. Getting back to our narrative, while at Kadesh, Moshe appeals to the king of Edom to allow the Israelites to pass through his territory, invoking Israel's history of suffering and promising not to use any of Edom's natural resources. Edom responds tersely, saying, "You shall not pass," adding a threat of military enforcement to this refusal. When Edom refuses permission, the Israelites are forced to lengthen their journey because the Edomites were descendants of Yaakov's brother Esav, and they were reluctant to become embroiled in a dispute with a relative. Moshe, no doubt disappointed by Edom and grieving for Miriam, is further bereaved. Aharon dies on Mount Hor. Moshe transfers priestly leadership to his brother's son, Eleazar, along with Aharon's vestments. The nation mourns for its founding priest for 30 days. Following a battle in which Israel defeats the Canaanite king of Arad at Hormah, the Israelites further complain about their hardships. God punishes the typically disgruntled Israelite community with lethally poisonous snakes. Moshe is instructed to construct a copper serpent which will be displayed on a pike. Afflicted Israelites are cured by looking at this metal snake. Citing a lost Book of the Wars of the Lord, the route through Transjordan is detailed, culminating in a battle against the Amorite king Sichon, whose land the victorious Israelites conquer. A similar victory and conquest follow the Israelites' battle with Og, king of Bashan. Our first Parsha concludes with the wandering Israelites encamped in the steppes of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. Our second Parsha, Balak, begins on page 894 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 669 of the Hertz. The Parsha is named for Balak, the king of Moab. In one of the most gripping scenes in the Torah, the pagan prophet Balaam has been summoned to curse the assembled Israelites on behalf of Balak, king of Moab. Fearing the Israelites and their divine mandate, Balak, through a series of invitations, joins forces with the Midianites to engage Balaam to curse the people of Israel, hoping to weaken them and mitigate the potential threat they pose as they travel en masse close to his borders. Balaam is an enigmatic mixture of heathen prophet, true believer, and instrument of providence, reflecting either sincerity or self-promotion. Balaam asks the delegation from Midian and Moab to spend the night so that he can receive God's instructions, explaining that he can only do and say that which God instructs. God tells Balaam that he may not go with them. He must not curse the Israelites. Balaam sends the delegation away. Balak sends a second delegation, promising Balaam great riches for his service. He again asks them to wait overnight, and this time God tells Balaam that he may go if he wants to, but he will only be able to do what God commands. En route to his prophetic task, an angel of God, unseen by Balaam, blocks the road, standing before the donkey on which Balaam is riding. The beast alone, perceiving the divine emissary, turns from its path, injuring Balaam's foot against a wall. The bruised Balaam curses and beats the miraculous mount. After 3 beatings, the donkey speaks, reproving Balaam for his merciless blows. The angel of the Lord finally reveals himself to Balaam as well, explaining that the hapless animal has, in fact, saved him from divine wrath, as his mission to curse Israel is contrary to God's will, but permits him to continue his journey. Balaam meets again with Balak and his cohorts, who sacrifice with their hired prophet at 7 altars constructed for the occasion, before again sending Balaam to execute his appointed task of cursing Israel. On 3 separate occasions, Balaam approaches Israel to carry out his mission of malediction, only to pronounce a series of blessings for the chosen people, culminating in the famous pronouncement, Ma tovu ohalecha Yisrael, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob. Balak is furious and admonishes Balaam for failing in his task. The prophet repeats his earlier disclaimer. He can only act as instructed by God. Balaam proceeds to prophesy a bright and hopeful future for Israel. Both Balak and Balaam go their separate ways. Our sages were understandably perplexed by Balaam. Was he a friend or a foe? Rabbi Arnold Eisen, retiring chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, teaches, he did follow God's command to bless rather than curse Israel, and his blessings were so beautiful that we repeat one of them each morning. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob. Balaam prophesied accurately that Israel would be a people dwelling alone, not reckoned among the nations. Yet, in the very next parsha of the Torah, God orders war against the Midianites, Balak's allies, in the scheme to curse Israel, as punishment for their successful incitement to orgy and idolatry. and Balaam is among those killed. Alas, the destiny of national greatness foreseen by Balaam must wait. After the high drama of Balaam and Balak, the Parsha ends on a low note, retelling a lapse in Israelite behavior. The people are enticed by Moabite women into licentious liaisons and idolatrous worship of Baal Peor at Shittim. Predictably, God responds with sharp anger, commanding the execution of the ringleaders in this wayward incident. An Israelite man brazenly flaunts his affair with his Midianite paramour before a tearful Moshe and Israelite community. The priestly Pinchas, son of Eleazar and grandson of Aharon, summarily executes the lustful couple, apparently confronted in flagrante delicto in front of the tent of meeting, impaling them with one spear. His zealous ire meets with God's approval. A plague which has taken 24,000 Israel lives is thereby stayed. The Haftorah for this Shabbat is from the writings of the prophet Micah, verses 5:6 to 6:8, beginning on page 915 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 682 of the Hertz. The book of Micah from which this Haftorah is taken is one of the so-called minor prophets, or more appropriately, the 12 prophets. He was village-born and spoke on behalf of the downtrodden peasantry who were inundated by numerous taxes and other oppressive treatment by the ruling class. He denounced the luxury of degeneracy of city living, the land grabbing of the social leaders, and the hypocrisy of religious leaders. The Haftorah opens with two prophecies addressed to the remnant of Jacob after the destruction and dispersion of the northern kingdom. The first prophecy turns on the image of dew in a message that gives hope to the people that just as dew comes from the skies, their renewal will come directly from God. The second prophecy introduces the simile of a fierce lion which tramples wherever it goes. This figure of power and violence gives a sense of empowerment to the nation in exile. Speaking on God's behalf, Micah then confronts the nation by recalling deeds of divine redemption from the past. Like Isaiah, he foresaw a time when nations would beat their swords into plowshares and learn war no more. He also gave the world the noblest definition of true religion. What doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? There is a reference in the Haftorah to what Balak, king of Moab, plotted against you, and how Balaam responded to him, thus providing the connection to today's second Torah Parsha.